don't go on camera that much, but I thought we should do this video. There's a lot of videos lately floating around about cost, what it costs to get into the hobby, and what it costs to get this kind of work done. What it costs to restore a car versus buy a car and everything else. Now in this case, this vehicle is what we call, well, it started out as a repaint. So we'll take it for a walk. We'll explain that a little bit. So one time the car was painted white. We believe it was an enamel, maybe urethane, but probably an enamel. The whole car was painted the same way. Now what they did 25, 30 years ago, whenever this was done, there was dents and scratches and whatever. They basically just flood a whole vehicle with filler, block it out, and paint the car. You know, prime it, paint it, whatever. But what they did at the time, these cars weren't real valuable, so time was a factor. So either it was do as little as you can and repaint it, or just flood the whole thing with filler, make it smooth and repaint it. Now what they did is they did the filler thing, the Bondo bucket. Is that good or bad? It depends on who did it and how. Now in this case, the car looked really, really good. The downside was when you look down the body line, it was all squiggly. It is what it is. Now the guy that owned this car wanted a repaint. Well, there was a lot of things we had to address, as you can tell by the primer, to even make this a relatively decent repaint. Now the metal on this car is good. The bottom of the car is incredibly sound and mostly original. At one time someone did some kind of weird black undercoating. I don't think they hid much. I think they were just trying to save it because there's no rot anywhere and some of it's fallen off and it's just old green paint underneath. So this car is pretty sound. These down here were replaced. The rest, I believe, was original. The doors were dinged up because it was full of Bondo down in these areas and a little bit up here. Those little dots, it was failing. Anyway, that's all in other videos, so we're not going to worry too much about that. Let's not get into the minutia of all the stuff we did on this particular car. What we're going to talk about is why would you not restore this car? And I wish I could have, because it was such a nice car. To take this down to the metal, being that so much of the metal was good, it would have been a really quick, easy restoration. Now, easy is a very subjective term, I should say. And this is why, right? You can go out and you can watch a lot of videos on these cars. What does it cost to rebuild a car? To restore a car? How far are you going to go? Now, if you watch a few videos, just to bring it up where the metalwork is done with primer, you could hit like $30,000 real fast. Now that means it's not even painted. That's like if you're doing floors and rails and trunk floors. Maybe you got to buy doors, trunk lids. It takes a lot to get there. Now to strip this down and figure out the hours, it could be anywhere from 2 to 400, 500 hours. So think about the trades. A lot of them now being 100, and a lot of places more than that. So if you had 400 hours at 100, you follow, 40 grand worth of labor. So you can't do that on every car, because some cars aren't going to be worth like an $80,000 Roadrunner, $65,000 Camaro SS or Chevelle. You know, maybe a $50,000 GTO. Some of them might be 80. So numbers matching and things. You really got to pick what you do. So why would you not completely restore every single car? Well, cost. Now, what I like to do for people is assess the car and look at the car and come up with some plans. Now, what kind of budget does the guy have? Now, if a guy has $30,000 and it's a running, driving car and all the mechanical is fine, are we just doing from the sill up? and how much has to be restored. Do we have to put a full floor in it? And I gotta say, by the time you do 4 patches, easier, more money up front, but long run it's cheaper to do a full floor. Sounds weird, but it is what it is. How much of the bracketry can you cut off and salvage to do that, and so on. So this is the thing. People have different budgets and whatnot. I'm going to imagine this was about a $20,000 to $30,000 car if we went back about 10, 12 years when this owner bought this car. And it was probably half decent and still nice and presentable. But it was an older paint job, and eventually things start to fail. Now, doing it this way, you don't get much of a guarantee on anything, because if you don't take stuff off and you don't know what's there, you don't know what could fail next. So you have to make a judgment call. How good is the rest of the car? Now, we believe this car is actually pretty good. Another thing that comes into factor is, how is this car going to be stored? Now, if you leave it in the driveway at an apartment complex and throw a tarp over it, it's going to sit in there and go condensation like crazy, and it'll look great for a few years, and then it'll rot because of the condensation building up inside the car. Now, if you park it in a garage, you got to be careful, because the concrete floor, just like this one, in a regular guy's garage, and he doesn't heat it or do nothing with it, even if it's above freezing, because he lives in a city where it's a little warmer or whatever the case may be, there's a lot of condensation coming out of the floor, like a lot of humidity, I should say. So you put it in a real humid garage. This is where you get these cars that stink. They get musty. They look okay, but little things, then you start cutting into the rocker and they're rotting from the inside out. So sometimes the garage isn't the best thing. Now, one way you can store them, some guys will put a tarp or a vapor barrier plastic on the floor, put 4 blocks, park the car on top. That does help. One thing I've seen that makes sense to me, if you have a single bay for the car to be in, they'll put a little micro furnace up front, which is one of those little heaters with a fan. You don't necessarily have to have it cranked wide open, but just set it at the lowest setting, and it's always going to blow air. So even when it's not heating, have it so that the fan runs all the time. As long as it's got air, generally condensation won't set under the car, but you get the idea. The other thing, you can run blocks, lift it way up in the air. There's a few different things around it. However, nothing beats the heated garage. Now, if you can't have a heated garage, do you have a carport? And although that sounds hokey and not very protective, a lot of the old guys that have car collections, especially out in the country, they'll have like 15 cars, and 4 or 5 of them might be high-end Mopars that are parked inside a heated building. The rest of them are parked in what they used to call the machine shed. Now, a machine shed was basically a back wall with side walls and a roof. And the idea was, back in the day, they'd park tractors and balers and combines and whatever else in there, rakes for the hay. And by doing that, they were just out of the major weather. Now, the good thing is the front of the building is open. So as long as you have the car backing out of the sun, and I'm saying one of these, all restored, even if you have no mud, so have some kind of tarp, plastic, something, some sort of a floor without dampness. I've actually seen where guys have run 2 barn beams up above the ground, drove the car up on it, and parked it in a machine shed. Or you put a whole bunch of gravel down. You know, there's a few options. The key to that, and why I say it works, especially in the wintertime, the air tends to get real dry in the winter. So if you have it parked in there, there's always air blowing through it. It may never condensate as long as you don't have sun that hits it at certain times. Is it the best? Might be better than closed up in a chicken coop. Let's put it that way. Like, once you lock it in a little building, if the building's drafty and weird, or you open it once in a while, you're going to get some amount of condensation. So if I have a carport versus a small garage that's kind of humid, where would the car be better placed? Now, keep in mind, to keep the sun off it, you can always get a proper car cover. No, don't do a tarp. Guys will throw, as a friend of mine learnt with his truck, he had it in a warehouse, but the warehouse often had the big front doors open. It was like a hangar. And when they were working in there, they'd have that open. And all they did was back in and grab trailers and leave, right? So he had his truck in the back corner, and he decided to throw a tarp on it to keep the dust off. But because wind blew into the building a lot, you got the tarp sitting on the corners, and the wind is moving the tarp. And what happened in the spring, he brought it to me in all the corners. And it was a Chevy short box, so the front corners of the hood and fender were rubbed. Up at the cab, there was one corner that rubbed a little bit. And then on the back, I believe the fenders had some real mild spots. So I basically buffed it off, and it took like 10-15 minutes to correct it. He was very lucky. We had a base coat, clear coat job where there was a lot of clear coat, and I knew the truck, so I knew it could be fixed. But if you would have been in a worse area with a lot of wind, you're going to eat through it, and now you've ruined the paint job. So that's something to keep in mind. So spend the extra money on the car cover that's a little soft on the inside. But I've parked my car a handful of times in my tractor shed beside my old shop, which is a lean-to with a back wall and a side wall. The front's wide open, and quite frankly, snow blows in a little bit and gets on the car. But look, you're not going to hurt too much. What you don't want to do is get a bunch of condensation in the car. And I'd go out once in a while when we get those real hot spells in the winter for a few days. Start it up, let it run, pull it out, pull it back in, make sure everything's working. You know, you get a little snow on it sitting outside. Honestly, if that little bit's going to make it bad, the car's probably already trashed. So that's some perspective. But the cost of building these, why would I not restore this car in particular? It was a matter of cost. So his idea was to take it to Mako. We've all heard of Mako. They use their own kind of weird paint. Don't know what it is. Don't really care. But whatever they do, basically, it's a good place if you're going to take like fleet trucks or vans. You bring a car in, they go around, they scuff it up, touch up a few little spots, and all they do is fix the spot enough that the paint will hold and not show cracks. So what they offered him was to fix this spot, just where it had peeled a little bit, but nothing more, and the rest of the car was going to be done, and they were going to reshoot the car. And the price in Toronto, Canada for that was going to be somewhere in the $3,500 range. He asked about any kind of warranty. They said none whatsoever. For $5,500, they could do it with a warranty. From what I understand of the conversation was they didn't do anything any different for the $5,500. So he told me he thought that was kind of suspect and he wasn't sure what to make of that. And I have a feeling that all they would have done for that extra $2,000 is made sure they had enough money to paint it a second time. Because in the warranty, if they do have to fix it and repaint it, the warranty ends after they've fixed it once. So make sure if you go to these little places and you think you're getting a bit of a deal, make sure you look into that. Now, they use some sort of single stage paint. I don't know if it's urethane or what it is. It could be some kind of speed coat. It's their own proprietary thing, which means they don't really want to tell you. If anyone out there has done work at a place like that and knows what they're using, put it down in the comments. It'd be really, really good to know. I've asked the Mako that we had in Ottawa, what kind of paint is it? Well, it's our own paint. It's car paint, right? I mean, that's kind of what I got. So, I mean, I don't know what it is, right? So the thing is, could it be like an acrylic enamel or something soft? And hopefully it's not something lacquer based, because, a bird craps on it, it melts the paint. Now, again, if you have vans, delivery vans, you run all over town, it's just about cleaning it up, keeping the rust off, and you're going to repaint it every so often anyway. Just paint the bottom. You know what? There's nothing wrong with that. It's a service. But if you're doing a car like this, and even with what we're doing to this car, we didn't take it all down, but everything is solid. Everything is stuck on good. There's no weird little edges. We've went around the car. We fixed every little bit of it we possibly can. And not everything was failing in this case, but a lot of things were out. The doors didn't fit good. They fit okay-ish now. Like, we just made the car better than it was, made sure all the edges were caught. Now, the idea is we'll refresh the car. We'll put a nice coat of white paint on it. It's going to look good. But hopefully we did enough that it's going to last, because let's face it, you want it to last, say, 10 years looking really decent. But that's also going to matter how the car's stored, how the car's looked after, right? So someone looks after his stuff, parks it properly, keeps it dry. I'm not opposed to leaving them in the driveway, but you got to keep in mind, if anything goes wrong on my personal car, I'll be like, oh damn, I got to paint it next summer. If you're paying, you probably don't want to be doing that until you have to. Now, I would say a paint job will last a guy about 10 years. In 10 years, you're going to have mishaps and little marks and things that happen anyway. At the very least, you'll want a refresh, which is basically clean it up and repaint the car. Now, if it's a show car, a bit of a trailer queen, you don't actually drive it, you can probably get longer than that, but only if some of the bodywork underneath doesn't fail, which is why you want to do down to metal restoration. Now, by the time you need to do something like that, a car like this, I mean, I don't think you'd have to if you're running it in the summer and you're taking somewhat good care of the car. The metal on this car is really, really solid, really, really good. There's nothing hidden underneath. Nothing's weird. If any bodywork does come out somewhere, we've got enough of the car good enough that let's say something happened to the corner of the fender where, oh, it turns out it was full of cheese, and by cheese I mean filler, and it starts to bubble out, like even 8 years from now. We have a paint code. We can fix it, blend in the fender, buff it out. Car probably looks new again. But honestly, what usually happens is there's a few marks here and there, some scratches, rub marks where tarps were put on, and so on. Maybe he had the windshield replaced and the guy chipped it around a little bit, putting it in. It's hard to say, right? Like, why is it that we had a few chips on this side, and from here over, someone had filled the hell out of that? It is what it is. All we can do is fix it. We had to fix all those lines in there. You know, some of those lines, would they re-crack? What happens is your seam sealer in there tends to crack and dry up. This one was pretty good. We redid it, but at some point it could separate again. Up in here, this one's really healthy. Again, sometimes they split. So all we're doing is as much as we can to save the car as long as we can. And at the end of the day, that's all you're doing. And for what the guy had price-wise, what this car was, what we're doing is totally worth it. I'm not going to tell you what it's costing them, but I can tell you it's nowhere near the $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 that restoring a lot of these cars could be. Now keep in mind, he takes this to car shows, but we're talking, you know, non-Autorama, non-SEMA shows. The shows he goes to is at the local fair and, you know, car meetups in Toronto, that area, Barrie. So he drives it to the fair, he drives it on weekends. This is a car that you can show and shine, right? I imagine, you know, at some point we'll try to convince him to join us at a few car shows. I like to go to car shows in the summer, the local ones in different towns, because you get to see really cool cars that you don't see at the big shows. Because at the big shows, let's face it, it's all about the Chevelle and the Camaro and the Mustang. I kind of like the oddballs, the stuff you don't see every day. And I got to tell you, these 68 Firebirds are beautiful. But I work on so many of these, you almost get tired of seeing them. Not that I've seen a whole bunch, but I've got 2 or 3 still in the roster coming up. And other than the 169 Firebird, the next 1 and 2 are probably 68s. Oh, and there's a 67 Firebird convertible. But I won't be doing the body and paint on that one. It's coming in shortly. And what we got is a complete Ride Tech. Frame connectors, 4-link saddle for the back, and then all the suspension brakes and all this. So all we're going to do is install all that, and then we're going to paint the firewall and the bottom of the car. And after that, the car will be built someplace else, and then it's going to go down to another shop where a guy does really, really high-end work. Now, is it an expensive model or something like that? I have no idea, but I can tell you this. It'll have, well, it already has brand new quarters, brand new tail pan, I think a complete one-piece floor, the doors, the fenders. The whole car is pretty much a 67, but it's completely new steel. Oh, and get this, it's a Camaro and not a Firebird, so that'll be kind of fun too. But again, we're not doing a whole bunch to it. Painting the bottom, doing all the suspension work, sending it out. So that'll be a nice one to do. I think where he's getting it built as far as engine and stuff goes and interior is down in a different city about 4 hours away. It makes no sense for him to bring it up at the end for the paint job. There's a guy down there that he knows that'll do it. They're going to do a really high-end paint job. I don't like to do too many of those because they eat up a lot of time. And then you're working on like 1 or 2 cars all year, and that's, I'd rather work on 6. I like a bit of variety. So it just depends on the level you want, how much money you have. And I mean, in the case of the car that I'm mentioning, there's going to be way more money into the car than the car will ever be worth. It's going to be like an LS swap Resto mod with Ride Tech, which is odd because it's a convertible, and I believe they're talking about an engine package that'll produce about 600 horse. So, depending on your budget, how much money you got, would define what you want to do or how far you want to go on the car that you want built. What we have here is a very clean OEM finish in white. There might be the odd little nib in it, but it's nothing too concerning. When I say OEM finish, there's kind of there's very little orange peel, just barely enough that, like I say, it looks like a decent OEM job. If you look at the light, you can see that we can get a bit of texture, but it's so flat, like it's almost nil. But and I mean, not to mention, you know, if a guy wanted to spend a little more money, I'd have no issue with the amount of paint on these pieces when the car's together. You could give this car a complete buff job and it'd look amazing. So, but as a driver, in perspective, the guy that owns this, I'm pretty sure he'll just run it, wash it and wax it once in a while and be happy. So this is the thing. I feel like if you're showing off to other people, you tend to spend more money than you have to. But if all you're doing is impressing yourself, it just depends on how far you want to go. This is going to be a really respectable car. And I mean, even sitting here outside before I brought it in with the damage and everything, I had guys coming in and out of here and, by the way, what do you want for that, right? I'm like, it ain't my car. Would you offer him this? Would you offer him that? I'm like, nope. I'm not even going to pick up the phone because this is a customer's car. But if the number's high enough, I might. And these cars have all become worth something. So that being said, it all depends on what you want to put into a car. And if it were me, and I had to give the biggest advice I could possibly give, I would spend as much money up front as I could on something half decent. Bring your body guy with you, or your Mustang guy, or your Corvette guy, or your Impala guy. You know, if it's a Dart or a Roadrunner, make sure you find that Mopar guy that knows those cars. Bring one of those guys with you. But instead of spending, say, $5-6 grand on a shell and trying to track it all down and building it, you're going to put more into the car than it's worth. But if you can get one between $10,000 and $25,000, depending what it is, of course, you know, you might have to throw another 10, 15, even 20 at it, but you're still going to be lower than if you start with a complete rebuild. Because I know I've looked at a few of them cars, and it don't take long for them to become a $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 build. So if you want to have something you can drive and enjoy, most people won't go to the weekend show and shine or the fair where people can walk around, or, you know, different car shows. Nobody wants to bring their car because it might get scratched. Something might happen. Some kid might lean on it. And these are things to consider. But if you have an okay car for 20, 30K, half the price of something new these days, right? You know, maybe you got a $5,000 to $15,000 paint job, maybe less. Just depends what you got. You know, you're not going to lose your mind when a little thing happens somewhere. And realistically, I go to a lot of car shows. That's not even a thing. Does it happen? I guess it can happen. I've never really heard of it happen. I think somebody at one time said, well, someone leaned on it, put a little scratch in it. You know what I mean? I've never heard of anything really major happening at a car show. It's not that it can't happen. If anything, the only thing I've heard of happening was one really nice Pontiac a few years back. I knew a guy and he was going to a car show, and I don't know what happened, but somebody slammed into the front of him. Maybe he slammed into them. I don't know the outcome or what happened, but you know, the whole car was all pushed in and basically wrecked. Don't know if he had insurance or proper insurance. I hope he did. Insurance for these cars isn't too crazy. I use Haggerty myself, but there's a few other options. And I mean, what I like with Haggerty is you kind of name the price you want to put on the car, right? So you pay like a few hundred a year and they cover the car up to so much. So if you have like a $15,000 car, you're probably looking at 300 and change. If you're looking at a $60,000 car, I don't know what it costs, but like it's not double. It kind of goes up a little bit as the price goes up, which is good. The nice thing with them though, doesn't matter what happens, it's 100% covered. And if you write it off, they pay you out, but they let you keep the car because they believe you might rebuild it again, even if it's not worth it. Some people will. So even a total loss, right? With these old cars now, they're getting harder to get. But the cool thing is, even if you don't rebuild it, the idea is, well, the car got smashed, but we know how much money people put into these. So your tail pan, your brakes, your et cetera, your powertrain, you can possibly use all that, find another body, and then it's worth having another build because you've got a complete parts car to come from. So with Haggerty, it's all about the hobby. So keep that in mind. You know, you want to have insurance. And yeah. Anyway, hope the video made some sense. Cheers.